Hello, and welcome to Change the Face of Yoga, teaching toddlers through golden oldies. I'm very excited to be talking to lots of yoga teachers who will explain their passion for teaching yoga to students with different ages, physical fitness levels, wellness levels, and different goals. They will explain the benefits of yoga for these students and will be including teacher tips and pose modifications. I am Stephanie Cunningham of Yoga Lightness, and I've been teaching over 50s for 10 years. So this area is my passion and the passion of many other yoga teachers that you will be listening to in this series. Thank you so much for listening, and let's get started. Hello, this is episode 48 of Changing the Face of Yoga, and I'm talking to Jean Carlo-Wagner, and she is discussing her long-term teaching of cancer patients and others with chronic disease and pain. Let's listen. Hello, this is Stephanie Cunningham with Changing the Face of Yoga. My guest today is Jean Carlo-Wagner, and she's going to talk about something that I've been very curious about and quite frankly a little nervous about, which is teaching people who have been diagnosed with cancer and are somewhere in their journey on that trip, shall we say. And Jean actually had her own late-stage diagnosis of cancer at 46. And she had been working with special children, and now she's advocating for cancer survivors. She trains yoga teachers globally in a teacher training that is the first and only totally online course. She started yoga at 28, and this was to help her deal with anxiety. And as she aged and her body changed, as all of ours do, she realized that she required a different form of yoga. But after the cancer diagnosis and the treatment, she realized that she couldn't find a yoga class that fit her new needs. So she went out and she created one, which I think is very helpful. Her classes focus on building and maintaining breath stamina, reconnecting with our bodies as they are, and deep forms of meditation for healing. Welcome, Jean. I'm really looking forward to this podcast. I really need to learn something in this area. And is there anything else you'd like to add to that introduction?
Well, thank you for having me, Stephanie. I'm so glad to talk about a topic that is now coming to the forefront. And I think just to add that, to emphasize that after going through surgery and treatment for 6 months, weekly chemotherapy, I found myself physically exhausted and wasn't really able to find something that fit this very challenged body. I had been working out and was with the Y, but I could not return to any of weightlifting, stretch classes, yoga. I tried to do that and found myself mostly in tears. It was important to me personally to find my way back to some kind of health. And then it became a passion to help others because I knew I wasn't alone in having had such a dramatic physical and emotional reaction to therapy.
You say you've created a class for people in treatment, in long-term survivorship, and those in transition. Let's talk about each of those individually. I assume that a class for people in treatment is that they have been diagnosed with cancer and that they're taking some kind of treatment, chemo, radiation, perhaps there's others that I'm not aware of. And what kinds of things are you doing to work with them when they're in this particular place?
My class is set up purposely all to be done lying down for many reasons. And I will say that it is sometimes difficult for people to be able to get up and down, even using a chair. And so there's not a place that's going to be perfect for every survivor, but I wanted to create a space that would be for the majority, and focusing on the emotional aspects and the most fragile of patients. People will come into class after a diagnosis, even before they start treatment, because you come in, I'm thinking of a woman that came in, she had breast cancer, and began the journey with a biopsy, which she gets a statement saying you have cancer, and then begins waiting for meeting the surgeon and meeting the oncology team and deciding on a plan. Even in that space, if you just give yourself a moment to consider that cancer happens just randomly, anytime, any place. It doesn't wait, for the right timing. So for me, I was I had a 15-year-old at the time. I was teaching, I was helping my mother. I had a lot of activities, and everything comes to a halt, and you're very focused on surviving. So to me, the emotional impact hits first and furiously. Creating a space where people can come in and decompress and absorb what is happening is just as important as then being in the process itself, moving on to going through treatments. And then there's 60% of people that are diagnosed are going to have a reoccurrence within 5 years and then become long-term chronic patients, somewhat like dealing with diabetes or any other chronic condition. And what they have in common is the need to manage our nervous system.
I didn't realize it was that high, that 60% will get it again. And what do you mean by chronic management? If I saw a documentary once where they were talking about cancer treatment in England, and this lady went through chemo 3 different times.
Yes.
And it was a horrific experience. I mean, I was really shocked that they would continue to let her do that. She decided to do that. But is that what you mean by chronic, that you may go through these treatments throughout your life?
Well, yes. And there are people that when they're diagnosed, are diagnosed with very late stage. So they might be already stage 4, which is considered terminal. Although we're seeing even people with stage 4 go into remission for periods of time, but they're still being what the medical world calls under surveillance. So they're being watched very carefully, probably every 3 months, having some kind of diagnostic procedure, which in itself is really stressful. Mm-hmm. As you can imagine, mm-hmm. You're waiting to see where and if it comes back somewhere else. So that's one kind of chronic condition, people that are diagnosed and will always be in treatment until they die. And then there are people, like you were saying, that once you have had cancer, you may have a reoccurrence of that particular cancer, and you are more likely to get other cancers. That's just the way the statistics come out. Yes, I have a friend who she is a 3-time ovarian cancer survivor and may be looking at a 4th. That means she will have to go through the same regimen of chemotherapy, which has been successful, gives her a period where she is looking like she's in remission, or what we call NED, no evidence of disease. But unfortunately, as she's in that period of surveillance, sometime within the year, she has had reoccurrences. And so she's retreated, which for that particular cancer, losing her hair, neuropathy, losing weight, and muscle mass. It's becoming more managed in the sense that we have better chemo drugs, keeping people alive longer, but also dealing with the stress of the physical toxins and the emotional stress of being re-diagnosed.
Yeah. Obviously, I think most people can understand the stress of the physical therapies because they're not gentle things. They're pretty full on. But I never thought about the emotional toll that it must take because, yes, just waiting every 3 months to see if it'd come back would be a very difficult place to live and a very difficult place to keep your equanimity, shall we say, I would think.
Exactly. And this is, I think, the most critical piece that yoga has the ability to make the most impact, has the most tools, because it's mind, body, spirit. And really what we're talking about is how do you manage your life when you're dealing with critical illness. And it happens for many other types of illnesses, MS and Alzheimer's and many of the other diagnoses that can really change a life's trajectory. But because there are so many types of cancer and so many, we're seeing such an increase. Maybe it's environmental, maybe it's because we're living longer. There's so many pieces, but everyone experiences that emotional shock, and it really is somewhat like tsunami. It seems to erupt, and the ripples continue for a very long time. And my concern as a yoga therapist is when we're in a state of stress, we know that that brings along with it inflammation, not sleeping well, maybe not eating well, depression, anxiety, all of these factors which can add to the suffering and pain of what's already happening with a cancer diagnosis. But like I said, that I see yoga, I see cancer as a galaxy of problems. And if you just think about our galaxy and you close your eyes and think of the stars and the planets and you think, wow, that's so overwhelming. It's so huge. And cancer is. But to me, yoga is the multiverse. It's so expansive. There's nothing that we can't make a little bit better with some aspect of yoga.
Tell me, how have your students in this particular class, the people in treatment, how are they reacting to these kinds of assistance from yoga emotionally, which I think is what you said was your major focus in this class?
Yes, I really see all the benefits. Yoga to me is about breathing. In the world of yoga, breathing is called prana. We have energy of life in us and around us. So the main focus is returning to a place where we're breathing fully and normally. If you think about anytime you have a shock or you hear something that is upsetting, we tend to get very constricted.
Mm-hmm.
Some people feel like they're holding on, to their breath. They're waiting for something to release the tension so that they can exhale.
Mm.
And I believe there was a movie with that title, Waiting to Exhale. And I think that that's where it begins, that in some sense, by coming to a community class where we're seeing people come to my class that have other illnesses, other chronic illnesses, and also come because they might be dealing with, I had a student today who came to class because she lost a friend, and she was coming because emotionally she was in so much physical pain she couldn't do her quote unquote regular yoga practice, and she knew she needed to deal with her emotions as well as her physicality. Making space for people that are in some form of healing, including cancer patients. So it is mixed. Although the class in the beginning was called Yoga for Cancer Survivors, I had people say, well, I just had surgery on my shoulder, and can I come to your class? So I just now call it Yoga for Healing, and it is a community class, so anyone can come. But I do tend to have more cancer patients, and even patients that are free of disease. After a certain period of time, depending on how serious your phases of cancer, 1, 2, 3, and 4 in general. So 1 being a very localized and small tumor, and 2 being a little bit larger and maybe into 1 lymph node, but still the size is relatively small. 3 being larger, a larger mass. Maybe it has gone through, for me, I had colorectal cancer. It had gone through my colon, through the nerves, and there was a tumor in 1 lymph node and a cluster of tumors, which is why I was stage 3C. And then, of course, stage 4 is generally considered terminal. So people are coming in with all sorts of different diagnoses, lung cancer, breast cancer, but it's the same. I'm just going to come back to the same thing, that living with the idea that you once had cancer, no matter how long you are outside of what's considered normal. After 10 years, I went back into an average pool of people that may develop cancer, even though I'm at slightly higher risk because I've already had colon cancer. After 10 years, I didn't have to go to be under surveillance any longer. For breast cancer patients in that stage 2 area, maybe it's 5 years, and then they're considered back in the normal pool of who is going to get cancer. And I have a student that's been with me over 10 years and has been clear over 10 years. However, she was told by the first oncologist that she saw that she was going to die of the disease. I think part of her is there in class because she knows keeping her nervous system in that parasympathetic state, which breathing mindfully and consciously or with awareness puts us in that state. She knows that it's helpful for her. That's the whole class. It's just this combination of people that are having to deal with some amount of stress in their life.
And I would think that even if a person has passed the 5-year or 10-year, it still would be kind of in the back of your mind. It would be difficult to just forget about it, I would think.
You don't forget, but it needs, I think, to be managed. And we know to manage stress, and I think in our environment, who isn't under stress? But when your health is that threatened, you get very motivated to take care of yourself. I think that that's maybe the difference, that cancer can be an opportunity to live well. I mean, to take care of your diet, make some adjustments, to eat things that are more beneficial, to make sure you're resting and meditating and taking time to breathe, and all the things that a very fast-paced modern life makes difficult, for the average person, is just magnified when you're dealing with, I think the word cancer in our global society is equated with the word death. Mm-hmm. Both words are just something we don't talk about in polite company. And, you know, so there's a stigma that happens too. So being in a place where you can be yourself and whatever shows up that particular day is all right. I think we all need that, but we particularly need it when dealing. We're talking about cancer, so when dealing with cancer specifically, yes.
Okay, so you have another class, or you have created a class, let's put it that way, in long-term survivorship. How is that different from the one of people being in treatment for the most part, for people that are healing? I think that's what you've decided to call it now.
Let me correct myself. There's just one class, and it was called Yoga for Cancer Survivors. But because I had so many people asking is it okay, Jean, is it okay if I come to your class because I've had hip surgery or shoulder surgery, or my 2-year-old is driving me crazy and I just need to come into a different pace. And so I changed the name. The class is the same, but I changed the name to Yoga for Healing to open it to anyone that felt the need to come and experience a therapeutic form of yoga, with the emphasis being on, well, not on the postures, although we do postures, but it's not about the speed or strength building, but it's about getting back in touch and using the postures to find out how things are working in a place where in yoga we call it the witness, that we look at ourselves compassionately and lovingly and non-judgmentally and notice what's happening without getting into that space where I should be doing this, I want to do that, last week I could do this, a year ago I could do that, maybe next week I'll be able to. The mind starts playing ping pong once. That's just the nature of what our mind does. But being able to assess how we're doing by witnessing. And I think maybe if you're all right with it, I'd love to do just a little 30-second piece of a witnessing practice that I think we can all feel for ourselves what changes.
No, I think that'd be wonderful. Go ahead.
So wherever you are, just turn your attention to how you're breathing and notice. And we'll just scan through our bodies with that same sort of noticing without judging. But let's just notice our head, our ears, our eyes, our nose, our scalp. And notice areas that both feel open and areas that feel any kind of tension or constriction. And just let it be what it is. And go through now your neck, the front, the side, and back, witnessing down your shoulders, your arms, elbows, wrists and hands, fingers. Notice what's there and let it be what it is, what feels open, what might feel constricted, any pain. And your torso and spine, just noticing with a sense of curiosity and tenderness and compassion. In your hips, your low back, down your legs, your ankles, your feet and toes. And that's it. In under a minute, when we shift our attention into ourselves, back to our breath, taking a moment to notice who we are and how we're feeling. These are powerful practices. They're very ancient in terms of yoga practice. And they're also very scientifically nowadays well-researched. Mindfulness-based stress reduction also uses these ancient techniques, but has gone on and done clinical studies. So these are well-documented practices. They don't have to be long. You don't need to be on a mat. You can be anywhere. I suggest people start using stop signs and red lights as an opportunity to stop and breathe. Notice. So how do you feel just in that minute? What happens for you?
It may be, because I'm a yoga teacher, but I immediately went into deep diaphragmatic breathing. I mean, it just happened by itself. I didn't say anything to it or do anything to it. I just immediately went into that and noticed that my neck is very stiff. But I really, really liked the idea of the witness. I've heard this before, but I think this is an excellent example of how it works, because I've heard of people who when they get the cancer diagnosis feel very betrayed, that their body has turned on them, shall we say. And I think this cultivating this non-judgmental attitude would be very helpful, because I don't think that the added stress of thinking that your body has turned on you would be exactly healing.
Yes, I definitely had to meditate through that, the idea that there had been a betrayal. And ultimately, I realized that my body had probably been giving me lots of signals and had been absorbing the stress. And this is how it manifested. This practice in itself, for me, would have been helpful. It's what I needed, and felt very alone and very isolated and not able to connect with the outside world. I had a lot of family and friends support, but I missed my yoga, and I was able to breathe in bed. I was able to meditate, but I really taking a shower or making dinner or doing anything physical just really knocked me for a loop. So it wasn't possible. I didn't have that. So these practices were things that I depended on. And after a 20-year practice of yoga, I knew enough to stay with my breathing and meditation. I just really didn't know how to help my body at that point. So in the class that I've created, I talk a lot about, when I train teachers, the languaging is different. I say your body instead of the arm or the foot, as we traditionally do in a yoga class, because I'm really wanting that connection and mindful that getting a person to feel their own hands and how are your feet feeling. It's important. So the languaging, and I'm always inviting movement and giving permission over and over to explore and see what is present today. If I'm asking someone to maybe inhale and raise their arm, I'm also reminding them that there's no end. I'm not saying, it has to be at the ceiling or it has to be, I'm just asking them to explore what that means for them. Raise your arm. And of course, we know if someone is, I had a woman who, she had so much of her shoulder muscles and back muscles taken out for breast cancer that she moved her left arm, but she had to use her right arm to move her left arm. By allowing any way a person is able to move or is exploring, because many times in a traditional class, we're aiming towards a type of posture where this is like the full expression of warrior one. And we're talking about where your knees and your feet. Well, first of all, we're on our back. I have to really be creative to recreate some of the postures for the ground. And so just exploring and giving people permission to sort of find that their own expression, because I do have people that have had traditional yoga practices, and then I have people that have never practiced yoga in their life. That range is there. So the instruction, to me, I go from what I call the kindest beginning. Let's raise your arm. Let's explore whether or not the ceiling is available and what that feels like. Make sure your shoulder and your breathing are all coordinated and there's no pushing or pulling or stopping with your breath. So it's all around. In fact, most of the students use eye pillows throughout the whole class. They're not looking at me, but I'm watching them to make, the only thing I'm watching is to make sure there's, no pain on their face, nothing that's out of alignment. And so I do only feel good corrections, is what I call them, with permission. And I think that's pretty unique. So they're listening, they're interpreting the movements, and we're going through beginning range of motion through all the joints. And then working, I think in yoga, as a yoga teacher, we work on releasing stress from our hips. So I do try to go through range of motion in the hip, loosening up low back, and of course, our neck. We hold a lot of tension in the weight of the world muscle. And so loosening up areas I know that we tend to hold tension. But today, going back to the student who lost a dear friend of hers, that he died this morning at 3:00. So I always have a theme in mind for my class, but I'm always willing to adjust too, because we start the class by introducing ourselves and just talking a little bit about where we are and maybe what our bodies need. That is also an invitation. Nobody is forced to do that, but if they want to. And fortunately, this student was able to say, initially I got a phone call at 3:00 and I felt, wow, he's 97. He's released from his pain. I'm happy for him. And she said, but now, because the class was at noon, I'm feeling very tearful, and my body is so tight, I don't know what to do with this pain. So we talked about the Tonglen, the Buddhist meditation of dealing with pain, allowing your heart to open and to breathe the pain in that you think you're experiencing or someone you love is experiencing. Allow the energy in your heart to change that so that when you exhale, what's going out into the world is the exact right thing to help relieve that particular problems. We don't have to know what that answer is, but we do have to trust that there's some kind of greater intelligence. And by the end of class, she was in tears. And she hugged me and she said, my body doesn't hurt. And now I can cry and I can go home and take care of myself and do what I need to do. So that's using the emotional piece and the physical pieces. So as we were breathing, we did a lot of breathing around feeling our heartbeat, feeling what happens when we expand and open our chest, because when we're upset, we tend to round our shoulders and constrict our breathing and protect our hearts and ourselves. So to me, it's all very integrated. The breath work, the asana practice, and the meditation. There's kind of a theme that will run through, but it's just at a much slower, longer pace for breathing, that 15 minutes of breathing and 20, 25 minutes of stretching and yoga postures, and then 20 25 minutes of meditation, which is pretty long practice for beginners.
It sounds like a really fascinating class. I'm very impressed with it. There's a couple of things I would like to explore. I was reading your blog and you were talking about the research and how the original research on yoga was not done well, the structure, that kind of thing. And so it was very hard to come up with anything definitive, but that it's gotten a lot better recently. And a lot of the things that they're doing is in meditation. And I was rather intrigued by this one statement that I think means that people are looking at it in research, but I'm not 100% sure, that the quality of life is taking precedence over survival.
Yes. Okay. The research, and I really do believe we, as yoga therapists, especially, I was just at a medical conference, so I'm talking to doctors, and they want to hear research. And I think people that have some kind of physical things going on, like cancer going on, they want to know that their teacher understands at some level what is happening for them. It's just like some yoga therapists work with postpartum, some work with prenatal, some work with low back. You know, we are becoming a field of specialists, and cancer is a specialty that has a lot of demands in the sense that there's so many different types of cancer. Colon cancer is the second leading in the world for deaths. So between breast cancer and colon cancer, that is a lot of what I will see in class, but lung cancer is right up there next. And so we have to look at the body of research. Let me just flip the switch for a moment and say, we look at the history of yoga, it really has separated into two paths. The oldest path being the meditative path. And in the last 200 years or so, this westernized, more physical piece where when we say yoga, we think physical yoga class, physical movement, one breath, one movement. That is more recent in history. If we look at this long history of meditative path, which we have in written form, 5,000 or 8,000 years, and then the oral form may be up to 15,000 years of people practicing these meditative techniques for a whole system of wellness. Yeah. Right? Yoga is just one part of Ayurveda, which is this other huge avenue to explore of ways to bring more health, more wellness. So when the studies began, they were not of good quality in the sense that research needs to be done in a very specific way for the medical community to call it good quality research. Having a control group, looking maybe at just one variable instead of looking at multiple variables and doing lots of different things in a yoga class to try to figure out what has actually worked. So most of the really early studies were done as qualitative reports from cancer patients. So after they would take 8 weeks of class, they would fill out a form and say, are you sleeping better? How did you sleep 8 weeks ago? How are you sleeping now? So a lot of the information is self-reporting, which is valid, but just not as rigorous as some other types of research. So the very first research was very positive and continues to be very positive about quality of life factors improving. Socialization, eating, sleeping, daily living, being able to function. Then if you ask, what do they mean by yoga? And that's where it gets a little sloppy, because some of these classes were very Iyengar based, which is more alignment based and adaptive, but still fairly rigorously physical. And some of the studies, and they would come out of India, are around Kundalini yoga, which we know is a lot of breath work. Breath work can be quite challenging. And for a healthy person, it can be challenging. For a cancer patient, it could mean that you could literally kill them, because if somebody is physically so fatigued that breathing very rigorously, you can set off an arrhythmia and you can kill someone. So it's that important that we have good training, understand that continuous breathing is very well documented and the only really safe practice. So we're not doing a lot of advanced, what we would call in yoga, advanced breathing techniques. So we have these different forms of yoga. And because we have these two paths that separate it. So we have the meditative path and we have a more rigorous physical path. The research is very clear that these meditative forms, these slower forms of yoga, which I like to separate out and call therapeutic. So I'm taking it from even out of restorative and putting it in another category. So we're dealing with people that are critically ill, possibly in our classrooms, and we have to know how to keep a safe environment. And to me, the research on these slower moving, very meditatively based, are starting to show more validity that they are indeed the safest, probably the best for the majority of, we're talking about a class, a therapeutic class. Now, so of course, some people are going to need one-to-one. So when somebody moves into a state of transition, in other words, they are now really even unable to come to a class and get up and down off the floor. For me, it's just me, but I offer to go to the house and continue the practices of meditation and breathing to help with transition. And that's just a particular commitment that I have to my students and to the whole piece of that journey and what it looks like to be, even for my classes, losing a person that has been coming to class regularly for maybe a year. You have to be able to hold space for that too. And it's yoga allows that, because yoga, look at what the original form of meditation in corpse pose, thinking about how temporary this body is. So there's space to talk about what is eternal in us. Some energy, I don't pretend to know what happens. I just know that scientifically, energy changes form, but it doesn't die. That's just the nature of energy. It transforms. So I believe that person has gone on to do something in some form, and we can honor that in class. In my volunteer efforts, I am a director of a choir where we sing at the bedside. To me, it's just, we're all walking each other home. Somebody else said that, but that's the way I see it, that we want to have quality of life while we are here. And we want to be able to transition with as much peace and awareness.
I'm going to switch this just a bit here, because I think this is a really interesting concept that you've come up with, which is yoga for healing phone call. Do you want to talk about that a little? Because I've never heard of something like that, and I think that's a great idea.
For 10 years, I've been offering a monthly phone call. I announce it post it on Facebook. I have a yoga page, and then I have a group. Actually, I have two groups. One is called Damn It Cancer and Yoga with Jean. But basically, I knew from traveling and being with cancer patients, lobbying and being at retreats or being in a convention, that people would often ask me, can we do yoga? Can we come into your room and will you do yoga with us? And so as I became friends with people that were really dealing late stage, very difficult cancer, I wanted to offer something that on a regular basis that they could do from home. So in bed with their kids or on a mat or in a recliner or on a couch, but this basically the same form of yoga that I talked about, that in a studio, it looks like getting down on lots of blankets. At home, it's being wherever you're comfortable and doing practice, but in community. Mm-hmm. We can get very isolated when we're sick. So this allows people to call in. They go on mute. We chat a bit in the beginning, just like I do in my regular classes. And I ask what they need, what's going on, why are you on the phone call? And then thinking about making sure I try to navigate through bringing in all that. And as you probably know, when you ask students, it's like there's always a theme that comes out, like it can be the neck week, everybody's neck hurts. And so that's where you're going to focus your energy. Or around the holidays, there's always a lot of grief and pain and anxiety, I think for everyone, but particularly if you're a mom and you have kids and you want to do Christmas the way you've always done it, but this is going to be different. So having a chance to talk, have a place to relax, hopefully even falling asleep, as most people do when they actually learn how to relax. It takes a very long time to learn how to stay in a relaxed state and continue to be awake. I just say that's just part of, we're that fatigued, we're going to go to sleep, and that's fine because you're still hearing. Your subconscious is hearing, and it's important to be in community. So to me, it's creating a sense of community and doing what I'm passionate about. So that's just something I
just think that's so creative. I love that idea. That's just wonderful. Well, Jean, I really want to thank you. I think you've explained so well the needs of people who are in a chronic illness situation, whether, as you say, they've just been diagnosed or all the way to having reached almost normal risk because of their long, lengthy time of not having any cancer. And I certainly understand what you're talking about when you're saying the breathing, very gentle motions and meditation are the way to go. Although I don't think I'm going to start teaching people with cancer unless I took a lot more education in it. I do see how worthy this is and how much it could help people. And so I congratulate you on developing this idea, these classes, this training. I think you're doing a real service to your students, to the community, and to the yoga teachers who want to be trained in this. Thank you so much. And I will give you contact details in a minute, but is there anything that you would like to add that we haven't talked about?
I would like to add that I have 52 and adding meditations, and through my website you'll find that information. But I know financially it can be very difficult to pay for services, so that's my legacy. My legacy is leaving good content up and free downloadable. That will remain.
Let me give you the website so that if you would like to explore these meditations, it's www.yogabeing. I think I'll spell that, yogabeing.net. Jean is on lots of social media, and I will give you her Facebook, and I will include all of the other links in the show notes. But her Facebook is Jean Carlo-Wagner, and her Instagram name is Jean Carlo-Wagner, and I think I'll spell that too. It's Jean, then capital DI, capital CARLO dash, capital WAGNER. And again, this has been an amazing podcast. It's been so full of information and compassion. I'm so glad that you agreed to be on, and you're doing incredible, marvelous work. Thank you.
Thanks again.
Thank you for that wonderful interview. If you would like to be a guest on Changing the Face of Yoga, please go to my website, www.yogalightness.com.au, and under the Changing the Face of Yoga tab, you can complete the Be Our Guest form. After reviewing the form and finding it applicable to this podcast, we will send you a link to schedule an interview. Please download, review, and tell your friends of any podcasts that are of interest to you and to them. If you would like to contact me, send an email to info@yogalightness.com.au. And thank you for listening to Changing the Face of Yoga.